Hello, and welcome to the Mathematicians Podcast, the podcast where we follow the fascinating stories behind the people that count in the history of mathematics. Today, we are doing part 2 of a two-parter in a special subseries of the show, which I call the Injectives, where I get to talk one-to-one with people far more qualified than myself. Last week, we had on the show Dr Thomas Daffern to talk about the intersectionality of mathematics and religion. If you didn't catch part 1 of this interview, please go backwards in time by 1 week and listen to the podcast there. If you did listen to it, then today we get to finish answering some of those questions and hear the rest of what Dr. Daffern has to say. And with that, let's go. So it sounds like what you're saying is that the drive for knowledge, research, and indeed mathematics pre-existed and has really just stayed around ever since the Babylonians were doing early astronomy and astrology at the time, as well as an influx now of the mathematical writings coming from the Hellenistic world. Would it be fair to say then that the reason we consider it the Islamic Golden Age is simply the one language or one script that the Quran was written in then got spread across the entire area so that people are now writing books in the same linguistic script? And that's really just a collection of everything under one banner rather than being a distinctive age of research?
Well, I think it's a both and answer, because that the universality of Arabic and the Arabic script was enormously influential in creating a common language that intellectuals in Central Asia or Northern India, in the Mughal dynasty, it spread to India, all the way to Cordoba in the south of Spain, which became a hugely important center for intellectual activity in the Arabic world. You could be a professor in Cordoba, go and teach for a bit in Baghdad, go and teach in Delhi, and wherever you went, you could give your lessons in Arabic and people would understand it and write it down. That was incredibly important. But I also think there's a metaphysical thing going on here, because I think that Islam, I know it had its military expansion and all that, but deep down, I think it was a metaphysical hunger for unity. People were fed up with all the wars, the fighting. And what Muhammad was trying to do in his own genius-inspired way, and I'm like Carlyle. Thomas Carlyle was the first British philosopher to say, actually, this Muhammad chap was quite intelligent, took him seriously. That's why I bothered to do my commentary on the Quran, which took like 3 years of work, because I think the metaphysics of this was that we humans should be working in unity and peace. We should be sharing ideas in a cooperative way. And what we call the university in Europe, in Britain, which I love, I'm a university lecturer, it actually came out of Islam, because the first universities in Cairo and in North Africa were before the European universities got going. And it was only because of the influence of Islamic intellectuals through southern Spain, through Cordoba. Like one of the most important Anglo-Saxon mathematicians, a man called Adelard of Bath, went down to Cordoba and learned Arabic and read all their mathematical books. He brought it back to England, and really Anglo-Saxon mathematics began to take off because of that impulse. So I think there's, and Abelard, who founded the University of Paris, he again was in touch with Arabic Islamic mathematicians and Jewish savants, because in the Islamic world, the Jews were given important status as people of the book, and they were often brilliant mathematicians, often writing in Arabic. And the other thing that one could mention here, it's not a tangent, is that Jewish and Islamic mysticism often was mathematical based. The thing called the Kabbalah, which is the Jewish interpretation of their texts according to certain hidden codes, was often mathematical. And the same with the Quran. I've gone into this in my commentaries on the Quran. In a sense, mathematics is a divine wonder to the Jewish and Islamic mind. It's sacred evidence for the working of the divine intelligence. And from there you come down to the Christians doing the same thing with the King James Bible and counting up the number of words before the middle point and how many times, blah, blah, blah. But I think what happens here is a a falling in loveness with the all and everything. That's what this is. This is what the story is about. And it's out of that that mathematics really becomes part of the language for that all and everythingness.
Okay, all right. Let's talk about religions that have not survived, because many religions aren't now present or aren't now practiced in the modern day. I've checked Wikipedia, and that tells me that there are 10,000 recognized distinct faiths, but 92% of people would describe themselves either as Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, or not affiliated to a religion. The Greek pantheon is all but lost, but we have discussed in detail the Hellenistic philosophical traditions, and we've hinted at the rise of Christianity and Islam, but the older brother appears to be nearly forgotten, at least so far on my podcast. You've been talking about Judaism for a little while. Could you, by this time in history, so by about 0 BCE, Judaism is nearly 4,000 years old. They have so much preserved knowledge and wisdom, philosophy and tradition. Could you talk about why we don't see as much mathematics in the Jewish tradition so far?
Well, the conventional answer from the sort of biblical studies perspective is that the unique thing about Judaism was it was concentrated on different stuff. It was concentrated on monotheism and ethics. So the unique contribution of the Jewish mind was to really focus on God. They were interested in mathematics, and the Bible is full of fascinating mathematics, but they were only interested in it as a side show. The real show is what is the nature of God and how does God interact with history? And that was their important thing. And the rituals, the ceremonies of Judaism were all about bringing that divine energy into the life of the family through the Seder rituals and through weddings. And, it's about community building, right? They weren't interested in the idea of mathematics just as a job, as a profession, as a field of knowledge, because that would be to break off knowledge from the whole. And a good rabbi, and I've met quite a few, I mean, they might be mathematicians, but they wouldn't boast about it. They wouldn't say, I'm a mathematician. No, I'm a teacher, which is what the word rabbi means. I do mathematics as well, but I might also do history or literature or poetry or ethics or philosophy. You get a lot of joined up intellectuals in the early Jewish thought. They were also doing, because they had this Holy Scripture thing, they were doing commentaries on the scriptures. And then they were doing commentaries on the commentaries. And they were analyzing the meaning of words. And that's where the Torah comes from. The detailed study of the meaning of the Torah grows into what we call the Talmud. And still to this day, to become a rabbi, you have to study the text in minute detail, including mathematically, in fact. It's a very rational kind of training for the mind to study the Talmud. So yes, I think this laid the groundwork for the later Jewish mathematical genius, which I think was sparked by Islam. I think they became great mathematicians in the Islamic world because they were there helping write the books and translating them into Hebrew, and then they kind of burst on the scene in Northern Europe, in Amsterdam, and brought very, very advanced mathematical science into Northern Europe when they were kicked out of Portugal and Spain, which was a very silly idea by the Catholic Imperium that thought you couldn't be a good Jew and live here. Anti-Semitism reared its head. And so people like Spinoza, the greatest intellectuals, were kicked out, his ancestors. And if you trace a lot of these great later Jewish mathematicians, you'll find them going back to families that were kicked out of Spain and Portugal.
I suppose my question is based around a lot of the characters that we've met, either coming to Athens or Alexandria in the most part, and I find out where they were born or where they come from. And so far, I've not met anyone that has come from Jerusalem or a neighboring city, which makes me think that we haven't had any Jews move to Athens or Alexandria. Would it be a fair answer then to say the reason for this is they didn't consider it a worthwhile thing to pursue because they were quite happy with their own body of knowledge being more ethical and ritualistically based?
I think that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right then. Well, that's an informative answer.
It's a hypothesis. Yeah.
Sure. Well, I'll
Yeah.
happily have a conversation with someone else who can give me more detail on that.
Can I just say something? I just want to show you this book called Drunk with Blood: God's Killings in the Bible by Steve Wells. And he's an atheist or humanist, and he's gone through the Bible and counted up all the number of times God smites someone or a tribe or kills a people. And he's got a table of the number of deaths. It's an extraordinary mathematical analysis of the Bible and the number of killings. And he's worked out, I'm reading from the table, that in the Old Testament, God kills 2,821,364 named individuals, people, or groups of people. And in the New Testament, God only kills 5. It's a really interesting thing. And if you can get hold of this book as a mathematician,
I mean, we could do a hypothesis test on that to see if the two gods come from the same sample group.
Yeah, have a look at that book.
That is interesting. Every time you mention a book, by the way, I'm writing a little note of it so I can put links in the show notes. So
excellent.
Check below if you are looking for something that Dr. Daffern has mentioned. That is interesting. I'll have to check that out. The reason why I was laughing silently during that is I have a 3-year-old daughter at the moment, and I have done a similar study with Disney films to find out how many people die in Disney films. Although it's not been written into a book, it's just a just a table online. Okay, so I'm always interested in why people, both now and then in ancient history, dedicate their lives to developing mathematics. In particular, the people I'm in awe to are the monks who spent their entire life compiling books of logarithmic calculations, and goodness knows what motivated them each morning. On the topic of motivation, to what extent was ancient religion a motivation for developing new maths, or was maths leading the way and religion playing catch-up to try to explain the developing fields?
No, I think ancient religion was the main motivation here. It depends, of course, when we define ancient, but if we're talking, pre-Christian, let's say, as I said, the temple culture was absolutely central to the project of civilization and learning and economic activity, and literacy was part of that. Numeracy was regarded as part of literacy, and it was important that you learn to master your numbers, but it wasn't ever seen as the main thing you were doing. The main thing you were doing was being a priest, because these people, our ancestors, believe that life is full of very complex supernatural energies. The word for gods in Egyptian is neter, N-E-T-E-R. And they interact with our physical forms and with events in ways that can be determined mathematically. The netters can be invoked and were at different times of day, different seasons. That's where mathematics became important to rituals. So getting the magic circle right. If you're going to do an exorcism in Babylon or Egypt, you would draw a circle with certain geometrical shapes, put the victim in there, and then do rituals and incantations. And they all had to be done right. So this is where geometry and mathematics were help aids to the main work, which was one of spiritual healing, medicine, and keeping the community on an even keel so it didn't fall apart. The most important concept in ancient Egypt was Ma'at, M-A-A-T, and she's the goddess of order. So she fights against cosmic chaos and injustice. Ma'at is guaranteed by justice in the community. If the pharaoh is giving false judgment, lying, they knew they've been around thousands of years, they know that when a pharaoh starts lying, it's trouble. So morality, the priests would go to the pharaoh and say, look, pharaoh, you can't get away with that. Stop lying. And so they had what's called the prophetic function. And this was true in Babylonian world. Mari, we have tablets of prophets called Nabi, which is the same root as the Hebrew later word for prophets. The prophet had to go to the power people saying, look, the gods are not happy, stop misbehaving. And that's the morality issue. Now, maths was seen as helpful for that, but it wasn't the main story. The main function of the intellectual at that time was to keep society from falling apart. And I think, personally, I think it still should be, you see.
It's an interesting take. And I noticed that not all of the intellectuals that I've discussed on the podcast so far are philosopher mathematicians. There's a few that we've come across that are mathematician generals as well. And I wonder if we would ask the same question to a currently serving general, whether they would say that actually it was war and politics that drove mathematics and mathematics following. So I'm thinking about people like Archytas or Philo of Byzantium, the engineers and the people who built strong mathematical defenses for the city, or trebuchets. Similarly, I wonder if quite a few of the mathematicians we've discussed were also merchants in their part-time, and maybe an economist might argue that trade was the driving force behind mathematics. But today you're arguing that religion was the driving force and mathematics following.
Well, I'm not gainsaying the other aspects. They're also important for the development of mathematics. And if you think about in 19th, 20th century, war's been a huge thing. The internet came out of the Cold War, and advanced computing and so on. But I still maintain that the core mission of humanity is to find peace. And so Plato, if you read the Laws, he's lamenting the fact that history is so full of violence and war. He's trying to find a political formula whereby nations and states can live in harmony and peace, and also whereby people in different cities can live in harmony instead of constantly fighting each other in class warfare. And I think that's the religious side of. I mean, the word religion is a Latin word. It means that which binds us together. Religio is what interconnects us all as people. And that's surely the core thing that we humans depend on. And where things get fractured and break down, it leads to suffering. And that's why, I'm very interested in the role of medicine in this story as well, because medicine was, going back to your earlier question about empirical knowledge and that, Hippocrates, the founder of modern Western medicine, was an empiricist. But medicine has also a mathematical aspect, and it did from the earliest times, and it still does. Branches of scientific medicine are very mathematical nowadays, and that's why they're so useful. But so I think if we look at this in a joined up circle of knowledge, we see that all the branches of knowledge do have a mathematical facet to them. But what's the purpose of the circle as a whole? I would maintain it's to celebrate life. It's to find meaning as human beings from each other, from our friendships, from our families and our civic discourse. And that, I think, is why the Greeks invented dialectic, didn't they? Which is sort of what we're doing. It's conversation with a purpose between parties trying to work out common truths. And that's the genius of the Greeks, if you want.
Gosh, I've never thought of myself as an interlocutor, but I guess today I am. I do like the arguments that you make that other factors create the necessity for mathematics, and mathematics is that celebration of harmony and peace, and it is compelling. But I also know that many of my listeners will be screaming that the reason they do maths is just because they really enjoy maths and not for any reason other than that. So I do wonder whether the mindset around why people go into maths has changed in the large part in the modern day compared to how it might have been in ancient times. We have seen several examples of religious convictions affecting the mathematical development, like that of the infinite or the nature of causes. What belief do you think has been the most instrumental to mathematical inquiry, either in ancient history or right through to the modern day?
It's a huge question. The thought that comes to me is the notion of balance, which is at the root of algebra. And it was the genius of the Islamic mathematicians to work out that it's possible to make equations that have to balance. I think that this search for balancing is connected to the search for justice. And in going back to Ma'at and ancient Egyptian thought, the soul is weighed at death for its actions and deeds against the feather of Ma'at. And we're judged. It's a mathematical process. We're judged. If we've done terrible deeds, I've killed 100 people, I've killed 200 people, I'm really going to have a hard time in the afterlife. But if I've been a really good person, a surgeon, I've saved thousands of lives, I've been a really great husband and father, then I will get extra time in paradise. So, and I think the heart of that is this notion of balance, which I think is core to most mathematical disciplines. If you go into them in detail, as I've tried to do in my my book on religion maths, I would say that's where they interfuse. So that's an attempt at the beginning of an answer.
It's a great answer, and I'd encourage the listener to think about what belief they believe has been most impactful. I do wonder if your answer of balance is related to your own career or your own personal beliefs steeped in religion. Whereas for me, more of an atheist, my answer to this question would probably be the notion of randomness or the existence of randomness. In other words, something that cannot be known by an omniscient creator being. And that concept of whether or not it can exist, I think that's probably been, if not most impactful, certainly very impactful to the field of mathematics. I note, for instance, that the idea of randomness didn't exist, or at least not in a sense that I've been able to find in the ancient times that we've been discussing so far.
In randomness and chance, I mean, what's the difference between randomness and chance? Surely chance existed.
So I think I believe that it has always existed, but I think it relates to the idea of predetermination. So whether something can be known by, do we call it the sage in Stoicism, or by the wise man, or
Sure.
whether it can be known by God. And I think it is challenging to believe in a God without believing. Sorry, I think it is challenging to believe in God whilst also believing that things can be undetermined.
That sounds like a very important conversation. Maybe we could go into that another time. But
well, I do wonder
chance and
if
necessity,
I do wonder if your textbook has chapters on religion and stochasticism.
I have in the textbook, I have about 140 chapters so far, and there's a whole variety of topics. If you scan through the contents of the 3 volumes, I've covered most things. But as I say, I haven't covered. So, for instance, I've looked at time and religious mathematics, which is another important aspect of enumeration, how different cultures break up time. Does the day begin at dusk, like it's now dusk? Is that the start of a new day, etc.? The calendar and religious mathematics I looked at.
Have you got one on random?
No, I've got one on order. So it's the opposite of randomness. I think that I think the religious mind is more interested in order, and there is a thing nowadays in modern thought called chaos magic. There's a whole field of people that follow, this idea that chaos is the important thing. Chaos is the crucial topic. And so they've invented chaos magic. Now, I've coined a phrase called order magic. I'm with Osiris, who opposes Seth, who is always trying to kill him. So we have chaos, Seth, on the margins of civilized culture, always trying to. I mean, Nigel Farage and co. are the chaos magicians of the media. Now, I stand for order. That's why I live in the European Union. We believe that things should be ordered and civilized and cultured, not chaos run. So there's this tension, isn't there, in history and culture, which is going on now between chaos and order. I believe that order is the way to guarantee peace. But no, I'm happy to have this conversation. Yeah, fascinating.
Indeed. For listeners coming from an international setting, I should say Nigel Farage is a fringe politician in the UK who arguably stands for a alternative right, or let's just say creepy right-wing party. Okay, so we have spoken about the sacredness of numbers, some numbers, but could you give me a more detailed insight into which numbers were considered holy, by who, and why?
Gosh, that is such an exciting question to be asked, because in my 3 volumes, the first volume is devoted to this question. And there's a chapter, for instance, on the number 1. There's a whole chapter just looking at the number of unity and where it came from and which religions propose it. And of course, we would say the monotheistic religions, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, in their own different ways, focus on oneness. But it was also very important in the Neoplatonic world, in the Greek world. So there's a whole section on that. Then I look at the number 2, which is incredibly important too, because you have cultures that are binary based, that see two-ness as, or duality as, the core of reality. And the Chinese thinkers, which I reference, see reality as a dialectic between yin and yang, between the light and the dark. So they think two-ness is at the core, and so do to some extent the Zoroastrians. And then threeness becomes important. There's a whole chapter on threeness. And 3 was very important in, obviously, the Christian idea of the Trinity. Christians decided that God is a threesomeness, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And that emerged out of an attempt to map everything. Now, I argue it's a bit like trigonometry. It's doing a trigonometry of the gods. If you have threeness, you can map everything. That was the genius of the Egyptians.
Am I right in thinking that the Trinity was originally considered not Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but Father, Mother, and Son?
Well, the Holy Spirit is feminine. So yes, the Holy Spirit is the goddess, called the Shekinah in Judaism. And so that's where she comes in. So yes, the Trinity was also important, or threeness is important to the Celts and the Druids, who were the intellectuals and the mathematicians of Britain and Gaul and Ireland and Scotland, because they always thought in threes. To be a Druid, you had to study threeness at the core of reality. And I've written an encyclopedia of Druid studies explaining all that in detail, one of my little projects, because I live in the Druid heartland of Old Gaul. And their symbol was the 3 rays of the Arwen, which meet at the invisible light of God's grace. So threeness. Then there's a chapter on fourness, because other people said, no, four's the key thing. The square, the quaternity, things. And Jung, for instance, developed his psychological system around fourness. He critiqued the Trinity. He said, no, it's not enough. We need 4. We have to make things square. And so this, and then so on. I go on to 5, which is the pentad, the 5 points of the pentacle, which was sacred in the Pythagorean system. It stood for the head, the 2 arms, the 2 legs. That's 5, the 5 fingers of the hands. So there's a huge school of thought. Then 6 becomes sacred in Judaism. There are 6 orders of the Mishnah. God took 6 days to create the world, et cetera, et cetera. And then 7 becomes important. The heptad, as it's called. For Plato, the demiurge made man out of 7 numbers. And in Mesopotamia, there were 7 sages of primordial wisdom who were on the council of sages called the Apkallu. and then 8 is important. The Ogdode, as it's called, the I Ching, the great Chinese mathematical system, has 64 hexagrams, 8 times 8, and they love the 8 in Hinduism and Chinese thought. And then 9 is the sort of 9 months of the year of pregnancy and the 9 muses. It becomes a symbol of everything that we talked about, and then you stop there. It's like there are 99 names of God in Islam because nobody can enumerate the 100th. And in the Arabic writing that we adopted in Europe, 9 was a sacred number as well. So yes, I've gone into this in vast detail in the book, and I discovered lots of fascinating stuff doing the research. My view is that all the numbers are sacred and that they're all equally sacred. So when students used to ask me on the periodic table, which religion are you, which box are you in, I'd say there's a part of me in all the boxes. Because you can't do maths if you say, well, we're going to do maths without the number 2, or we're going to do maths without the number 4. We're going to do maths without the number 9. No, you need all the numbers collaborating to be an effective mathematician. And I would say to be a philosopher of religion, you need all the boxes, all the isms, all the ologies to make sense of the whole thing.
For listeners, Dr. Daffern mentioned, where is he on the periodic table? You didn't mishear that. He's talking about a periodic table of religions that he was holding up, and I will link that in the show notes if you want to see what periodic table of religions he is referring to. So it sounds like the answer to the question, which number is sacred, is chuck a brick and you're going to hit a sacred number. They're all important. Okay, so moving away from individual number, or static number, as we like to call it, could you give an explanation for the obsession with ratio and harmony, certainly in the Hellenistic world?
Well, ratio is interesting because it is related to the word reason. And the ratio is about the correlation between different numbers. And reason is the function in human beings, which is trying to mediate between complex rivalries, if you want. I think the obsession with ratio is this very human trait of trying to find the mean. And the word mind itself is related to the word mean, M-E-A-N, meaning the midpoint between things. And the word mankind, is related to that. So we're interested in ratio because we have minds that are seeking balance. So I would go back to my earlier point. I'd say that the obsession with ratio is another example of the search for balance between, numerical complexities, and likewise the search for harmony, because harmony was a Pythagorean word, and it's a description of how the cosmos actually works. This isn't a chaos. This is a harmony. And the duty of the mathematician and the philosopher and the intellectual is to find what that harmony ultimately is. And that's the duty of the wise statesman as well, to find a harmony between all the rival voices and conflicting tendencies in society. So I think the obsession is a healthy one, actually. Yeah.
That's good. As a maths teacher, we often try to convince our students that maths is more than just doing things with numbers. And I think you're giving a very compelling argument to maths being a broader thing than simply numbers are special, but linking it to this search for harmony and bringing things together. I quite like that. Speaking of which, you're not only standing in as an expert in religion today, but also as a seasoned academic in the world of mathematics. So with all of your historical research, hopefully you're going to find it easy to answer the question, what is mathematics?
Well, I'm going to go back to the etymology of the term. I'd just say it's learning itself, which is, it's in its original meaning. That is what mathematics is. It is learning and knowledge. I don't accept the modern definition of mathematics as doing stuff with numbers. I think, that mathematics is precise and ordered and sophisticated correlation of different branches of knowledge. I wrote, I don't know if you know this, but I've written a huge work called Being and Knowledge, which is my main philosophical work, which goes into this in great detail. It's the sequel to Heidegger's Being and Time and Sartre's Being and Nothingness. I wrote the third of the trilogy. It's called Being and Knowledge. And I'm arguing that's the key thing that we humans are dealing with. And by the way, in my table of the world's, it's called the table of the world's, the periodic table of the world's religious and philosophical traditions. So it includes all the different branches of philosophy, like existentialism, Aristotelianism, logical positivism, etc. It's not just religions in the narrow sense. But in that table and doing that work, I brought it into my work on Being and Knowledge. And yes, one of the boxes is mathematical sciences, which is box number 158, philosophy and mathematical theory. And I estimate there's 2 million professional mathematicians out there on the planet at the moment. I estimate there probably been about 20 million in total in all the cultures and civilizations in the world. It's a reasonable estimate. But my real love of mathematics is that it has applications in all the other fields of knowledge. And that's why I'm interested in religious mathematics. And it's not been developed enough. I think that's a lacuna, and it shows the problem of what I called hyperspecialization. And I think our civilization as a planet requires us to, if I can coin a word, de-hyperspecialize, with things like global warming, with the threat of nuclear war and so on. We have to start putting the ethics back into mathematics. I mean, as we speak, there's a lot of very clever people in different countries in the world designing the next generation of weapons that can incinerate masses of people. They should be doing something more useful, like working out the mathematics of peace, the mathematics of interfaith harmony, etc.
Excellent. As a quick game, then, so I think you've essentially said that mathematics is all of the learning. Can we play a game of what doesn't count as mathematics? So would you include, say, physicists in the group of mathematicians?
Well, come on, there's a whole branch of mathematical physics, so of course there's an overlap.
What about some biologists?
Of course, there's a whole field of mathematical biology. I had a close friend who was professor of mathematical biology at UCL.
Okay, well, what about geographers?
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm a passionate lover of geography, and to be a good geographer, you have to know mathematics. You have to work out, nowadays, the location, the sat nav, all that stuff is extremely mathematically organized, as it was when the sailors were going around the world with sextants and things. Yeah.
Well, there we go. That was a fun game. Okay, so a question that I intend to ask all of my guests, is there a mathematician that you are most looking forward to being featured on the show? So to give you an idea, we have just gone through the turn of the century, so anything post 0 BCE. Who are you most looking forward to hearing about?
Well, I thought this was going to be a question like, which one would you most like to meet? I'd like to, I'm happy to meet any of them. I would like to meet Aristotle, particularly. I think he had a very, very broad mind. And I'm glad to see you're going to be focusing on him coming up.
Oh, no, we've done Aristotle. He's episode 19.
Okay, you've already done him.
So we have just published Hipparchus as today's, as we're recording today. But by the time this comes out, we would have done Hero of Alexandria. So is anything post 0 BCE?
Well, are you going to do Einstein?
If I live to be 100 years old, I might get onto Einstein.
I'd quite like to meet Einstein and hear your take on him, because I've got some questions for him. And in the periodic table, books on religious mathematics, what I do is I do a thought experiment for each chapter. And there's one on relativity theory, number 75. And in the thought experiment, which is like a meditation you're supposed to do, you go into like an outer body experience and meet people. and you go out of body and meet, different famous thinkers who were working on relativity theory. And that I enjoyed writing those parts of the chapters. But I'd love to talk to Einstein about, I'm not comfortable with the speed of light being the absolute cutoff. I want to travel faster than light, and this relates to the experience of the soul when it leaves the body and goes down a tunnel of light, as seems to happen from all the empirical evidence when you die. I hope this happened to my daughter. And you go to some paradise world if you've been good. I think you travel faster than light down that tunnel. So the question then is, what is that soul made of, and how can it travel faster than light? I'd like to have that conversation with Einstein and work out the equations.
I'll give you a thought experiment then. If I flip a coin and I ask you to guess whether it's a heads or a tails, there would be a sense of truth to your answer. What's the speed of the truth? Surely the truth passes through all space instantly. Is that faster than light?
Well, surely that sounds like a Zen koan to me. What is the speed of truth? I mean, I could go and meditate on that on my cushion for a couple of days, and I'll get back to you.
Well, I mean, hopefully you'll know immediately, because the speed of truth is instant. It's interesting that you bring up Einstein to talk to, because he links back to our earlier conversation on stochasticism and the idea of randomness. I believe it is Einstein who's certainly attributed famously as saying, God does not play dice. And that's certainly a comment on the idea of predetermination and randomness in the world of mathematics. I might need to go and look that up though, and possibly edit that out if it wasn't.
No, he said God does not play dice with the universe. That's the key, but you missed out. Yeah.
Okay, with the universe. Okay. Yeah. So it's certainly an interesting fellow. I don't really know what he was meaning by that though. Whether that is an argument to say God does not exist because the universe inherently contains dice, or if it was a sense of doubt in his own ideas because he couldn't believe in a undetermined universe.
Have you seen the film Oppenheimer?
Not yet.
I recommend it strongly to you and your listeners because Einstein features in that film. He was a hero to Oppenheimer who cracked, how to release the awesome energy of nuclear explosions. And Einstein does say that quote in the film. It's absolutely worth watching. It's absolutely brilliant. I think what he wanted was some kind of order, some kind of harmony, and the idea of randomness somehow offended him. And that's why he didn't really like quantum theory, because it seemed to be moving away from an ordered universe. But anyway, Oppenheimer is definitely something to watch.
Okay. And I think this would be a good time to receive some divine intervention and bring the interview to a close. Otherwise, we may carry on talking for a potential, if not reachable, infinity. It remains for me to let you know that this episode was sponsored by the International Peace and Understanding. If you use offer code No More War, you can get an extra 50% of peace and 6 months of free understanding. Dr. Daffern, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Is there anything that you would like to direct the listeners towards, perhaps in order to learn more about your work?
Well, they could go to my main website. I mean, I've got about 20 websites, of course, but the main one, the Grand Central Station, is called www.educationaid.net. And there are then directions to most of the other websites. And that's the core thing. And I'm a great believer that education is the key to these solutions. I want to encourage teachers throughout the world. And I'd like a day where teachers come out of normal classes and devote themselves to discussions like we're having, which I call Education Aid Day. So anyway, you can read about it on that website.
Have you got a date on the calendar for Education Aid Day?
Well, I was thought it should be St. David's Day, which is March the 1st, because it's spring. It's a nice time to do this kind of thing. Most cultures celebrate spring. So I think March the 1st would be good. And I'm trying to get UNESCO to sponsor this idea here in Paris.
That's lovely. And what big project are you working on at the moment that people might want to hear more about?
Well, I'm working on completing my commentaries, which I've written as audiobooks. I'm now publishing them. Commentary on the Gospel of Matthew and Mark, but also the commentary on the Quran will be done over the next couple of years. That's an epic work. But I also want to do Being and Knowledge. It's only a talking book at the moment, and I want it to be published, which requires huge amounts of work and footnoting and academic references and God knows what. So that's going to keep me busy for about the next 5 years. 2 volumes of Being and Knowledge have been published so far, so you can have a look at that. And otherwise, the other thing I'll just say is I've just thought of an idea to stop the. This is about balancing, right? How can we stop the Ukraine-Russian war and stop the people in Gaza from starving to death? They're all like skeletons. It's absolutely tragic. I've thought of a way of joining up these 2 moral urgencies. It's sort of mathematical bit of algebra I've done. And you can hear about that on my YouTube channel, which is called IIPSGP, which is the acronym of my institute, International Institute of Peace Studies and Global Philosophy. The number 1. So at IPSGIP 1, if you Google that on YouTube, you can hear my solution to how we stop the Russian-Ukrainian war and stop the Israel-Palestine war, simultaneously with one set of actions.
That sounds very ambitious, and I look forward to finding out more about that. Again, links below for I think I'm counting up to about 19 different books that we've mentioned so far, and of course all the websites and YouTube links. If people wanted to get in touch with you directly to talk to you, do you have a public-facing profile?
Yeah, I mean, you can contact me on Facebook or on LinkedIn. I have social media, but on the educationaid.net website, you'll find my email and all that stuff.
That is, after all, how I got in touch with you. Yeah, so you can find Dr. Daffern by Googling him and finding his website, or the link below. Well, last thing to say then is thank you so much, sir, for coming on the show. I've really enjoyed myself.
It's been my honor, Ben. Thank you very much. And thanks for joining the rank of teachers. We need more teachers. So please, if you're listening to this and enjoy learning, consider training as a teacher and getting out there and helping the next generation fall in love with learning. That's what this is all about. If you don't have the love for knowledge, you won't truly become wise. And philosophy means the love of wisdom. We should never forget that. And congratulations on your A-level. Yeah.
And that's it for another episode of the Mathematicians Podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, then please hit like and subscribe. If you didn't, then don't worry. Next week, we will be back to our usual scripted episode. Although, given this interview has taken place so far in the past, I will leave it to future me to give you the introductory puns and tell you who is next on the agenda. Until next time, goodbye. Hello, it's future Ben, as described by past Ben. Although, of course, as I call myself day to day, present Ben, here to give you the introductory puns ahead of our next week. For over the course of the next 7 days, we will be charting the straightest of lines between here and our next mathematician, albeit that straight line exists upon a curved surface, as we are talking Menelaus of Alexandria. Until then, goodbye! The music today is Dance Macabre Finale by Kevin MacLeod. You can find more information in the show notes.